The Bob Murphy Show, episode 464.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Bob Murphy Show. This is going to be a fun one, at least for the geeks among you, and you know who you are. Recently, Curtis Yarvin was on the Peter McCormick Show, and a few people sent me that interview and said, hey Bob, I'd love to hear your take on this. Because for one long stretch in this long interview, Curtis gets hip deep into Misesian monetary theory, and his views on banking and what causes the boom bust cycle. And then Curtis, is relating it to his work and his analysis of the modern financial system and so forth. And so I have Steve Patterson on, partly because Curtis weaves in and out of his story his own experience in computer science and various projects of things he was trying to build. And so I got Steve to help navigate that terrain as well. So it's a lively discussion. Steve and I go down various rabbit holes as we are wont to do. So if you're into this kind of stuff, I think you'll enjoy it. Here's my discussion with Steve talking about Curtis Yarvin on Mises. Steve, welcome back to the Bob Murphy Show.
Thanks for having me.
So before we dive into the main event here, which is Steve and I are going to go through some clips from a recent interview between Curtis Yarvin and Peter McCormick. I watched Steve, it's like my YouTube algorithm suggested that I might like, and you had a thing on, is it either 3 or 4 confirmed paradoxes from mathematics.
Yeah.
And so I will just tell people, why don't you just give a brief, I guess it was 3, I wrote it down. Can you give people a brief plug for that if you remember making that one?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to remember off the top of my head. So I try to give the most charitable steel man that I can, which is to say that in mathematics, if you go along with the contemporary assumptions about infinity, then it generates many paradoxes, some of which are accepted as paradoxes. And the orthodox position is something like, well, you see, a paradox just means a counterintuitive conclusion.
Doesn't mean a contradiction. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, one of them is, let's see, I'll try to remember off the top of my head here. It's the Hilbert's hotel paradox. The idea is that if you had a hotel with an infinite number of rooms and an infinite number of guests, it would still have space left over for more guests. In fact, an infinite number of new guests. You might think that doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense, but according to the math, the claim is that it does. The other is...
Can I stop you?
Yeah, sure.
So that one, the way it works, folks, is it's like, yep. In other words, there's an infinite number of rooms, but they're like the cardinality of the integers, right? And so there's room 1, there's room 2, there's room ... And each room is filled with somebody. So it starts out an infinite number of guests, and you say it's full, right? Or there's a 1-to-1 correspondence between the room. And then some people, some guy shows up, he says, is there room? And you might be tempted to say no, but the hotelier is trained in higher mathematics, and he tells each person, just move to the room to your right. And so the guy who's in room 1 goes to the right, so now he's in room 2, and so on, ... Everyone can do that. You're not going to run out of, it's not like at some point, there's only n rooms, and so the guy who was in room n now can't go into n+1. That will never happen. So everyone can do that. You just freed up room number 1. Now that's empty, and you tell the guy, and you say, well, how many times could I do that? ... You could do that as much as you want. There's nothing stopping you from doing that forever. And so that's what Steve is getting at.
And it is mathematically proven. And so all of your natural intuitions that says something's fishy here, you have to override those because the mathematicians have spoken. Okay, so the second one, I believe there is Gabriel's horn paradox, which says that let's say an infinite surface area can contain a finite volume, if I recall correctly. And that's because there's this problem of convergence Do you want to? You did a great job articulating the other one. Do you want to?
Yeah, this one I can't make it so intuitive, but yeah, the idea is there's a way of mathematically describing. But if you drew it out, it looks like a horn, and they call it Gabriel's horn. But it, so the beginning, like the left side of it, usually the way I see it depicted, it's a circle and it's a horn and it goes in, but then it just goes out to infinity to the right, but it keeps shrinking. It gets really thin as you keep going out. And so then the idea is if you just go ahead and compute, using calculus and taking the limits as things go to infinity, what is the interior, you fill it up with paint or something and say, what is the interior volume? That sum converges. And so it's a finite quantity. But if you said, what is the surface area? This is the really interesting one. If you said, what's the surface area of the interior of that thing? Yeah. It diverges, meaning it's there is no limit. It's infinite. And so it's kind of weird. And then Steve even played a cool clip of mathematicians talking about that, or some guy interviewing a mathematician or something. Yeah. And he said, it's kind of weird because when you fill it up with the finite volume, like, wouldn't that be touching the interior surface? And so it's kind of weird that there's a sense in which, the liquid you filled it up with has a finite volume, but then the surface of that liquid is infinite. And the guy's like, yep, but there you go. It's a paradox, but not a contradiction because, yeah.
Yes. So this is a mathology a number file video. Number file is, in my view, they sin deeply in the domain of mathematics because they make all kinds of videos that are like really triggering if you're a finitist, let's say. Anyway, he laughs at that moment and he says, "Well, I guess that's the paradox." And then the takeaway. One of the takeaways of that video would be, when these two apparently contradictory concepts come together and your brain experiences cognitive dissonance, that's delightful. Wasn't it funny? This is the delightful, magical, mysterious, paradoxical nature of mathematics. Same thing happens in Zeno's paradoxes as well. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then the last one is the Banach-Tarski paradox, another famous one. I think we've talked about it before, which says you can decompose a sphere into a finite number of parts. You can rearrange those parts and then in some special way, and then you get a duplicate sphere of the same size, or there's a stronger version which says an even larger size. And the argument goes that this is something that comes from the axiom of choice, which is it's not supposed to have something to do with infinity. In my opinion, it does have something to do specifically with infinity, both the axiom of choice and the idea that when you're decomposing the sphere, you have to put it into a finite number of parts, but each one of those parts has an infinite number of points. So there's multiple places where infinity comes into that one. But this is another one that, again, this isn't a hot take. I'm claiming it's paradoxical. This is actually this is established that this comes from orthodox mathematical theories, and that it's just counterintuitive.
Yeah. Two things. So one is, and I think maybe we talked about this before, Steve, talking about that, was Richard Feynman in one of his pop books, whether it was Surely You're Joking or whatever the subsequent one, it was probably Surely You're Joking, tells a story where I don't know if he was in grad school or he was a professor at this point. Do you remember? Do you know the story I'm talking about?
Grad school.
Okay, yeah, I think he was a grad student too. Yeah. So he's there wherever the heck he was, I forget. And he's learning physics, taking physics, and he encounters some math guys at lunch or something, and they're all having fun with. And hey, Feynman, you know what? Do you know if we took an orange, like what we just learned in math today, is if you took an orange and cut it up into little pieces and put it back together, eventually you could make something bigger than the sun. And what they were meant was you could just keep invoking this procedure and you could keep making the orange, twice as big, and eventually just keep doing it. It'd be bigger than the sun. And the way Feynman said, no, you couldn't, he didn't challenge the math. He understood what they were invoking, but he said, no, in practice, you could only cut the orange down to its constituent elements, right? Like matter is finitely small. You can't it's not indivisible or infinitely divisible. That's what I'm trying to say, that eventually you get, at that point, I don't remember if it was quarks or if they thought it was, the nuclei of an atom or something. But so anyway, to be clear on that,
I'm not actually sure. I do remember that part, and I'm not actually sure he implies that he understands the math, because the way that he says it, I think it's more like, what the heck are these guys talking about? That's obviously wrong. So I'm not sure.
I'll have to go reread it.
Yeah, I'm not. I wouldn't want to. I think it would be a funnier story if that's the case. If he's like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. You're definitely wrong. I'm not going to look into it. But maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. He had a weird relationship with math, right? And he talks about this in Surely You're Joking.
That and women.
Well, true. Where he essentially, taught himself a bunch of mathematical concepts, came up with his own way of understanding calculus. And then part of his breakthrough in physics was apparently because he had this independent perspective on mathematics.
Yeah,
so
that's
I
true.
wonder. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, you're right. I should go reread that to make sure I'm not botching it slightly. Okay, so great stuff. Oh, and then the other thing I was going to bring up is just coincidentally, I recently, as of I think yesterday, Steve, I was scrolling on Twitter as I'm wont to do, and I came across something. It might be on your radar how lately there's been this war between the heterodox economists who are saying there's too much math being used inappropriately in mainstream economics. And then,
not at all.
Totally. I'm surprised that didn't come across your.
No, I have not heard this yet.
Okay, well, when we're done here, I'll send you some links.
Great. So this is within the mainstream. This is taking place.
Well, there was I think it was in the FT. There was, what is the guy's name? It was Tim Hartford. Wrote something about how they use way too much math in econ and it's stultifying and blah blah blah. And it gives the appearance of rigor, and then all the mainstream economists were just dunking on him.
Got it.
Okay,
yeah.
To point out To my experience, people who say there's too much math in econ just aren't very good at math. That kind of stuff, and circling the wagons, and so a bunch of MMT types and people like that were saying, hey, there's a surprisingly good article and you're right. And so that made it more ideological. And so then, of course, I was chiming in. Anyway, I was probably just trolling people. I can't remember what any substantive point I made. But what came out of that, and the reason I'm bringing it up now, is I saw a thing literally yesterday about someone saying, well, if we didn't have math, we couldn't do rigorous things, and which would lead to counterintuitive results like this. And he listed 8 what they called paradoxes, including the paradox of thrift. And there were 7 other paradoxes I had never heard of. But he was proudly, and it was funny as I went through them, and on at least 6 of them, I just thought, I don't believe that in terms of the economic, what they call the paradox of thrift, I think is wrong. The idea that, it helps if an individual saves. What if we all save? We get plunged into depression. I said, no, that's bad economics. I don't believe that.
Right.
So anyway, it was just funny. It didn't have to do with infinity, but it was just funny that they were proudly defending this mathematical formalism, because otherwise, how would we know about these paradoxes, which at least on 7 of them, at least 6, I was like, I don't believe that. And the other 2, I hadn't heard of it and wasn't clear from their little description what it meant. So I'm reserving judgment.
Yeah, please send that.
I'll see if I can. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find the paradox one, but I can certainly send you the things so you're aware of this controversy that's brewing.
Yeah, it's actually relevant to what we're going to discuss later as well, this role of mathematics and economics, because Yarvin
if we ever
up,
get to that, I might just keep riffing on what I found on Twitter. All right. Okay. So yes, folks. So recently, Curtis Yarvin, what is his pen name again?
Mencius Mulbug.
Yes.
Or it was, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because before I used to know that Mencius Mulbug, and then finally, I kept saying, whose real name I guess is Curtis Yarvin, and now he's it's kind of like Dwayne Johnson used to just be The Rock, and you're Dwayne Johnson, who's that? You know The Rock. Oh, and now it's I forget that anyway. So Curtis isn't as jacked. So he was recently on the Peter McCormick show, and a few people independently said to me, "Hey Bob, there's a lot of fodder here. Why don't you go through this? I'd love to hear your take on this stuff." Let me just say at the outset, folks, I grabbed 4 clips, in consultation with Steve here, because I didn't want to go through this by myself. That Curtis talks a lot about economics and game theory. I can certainly talk about that. And in particular, he talks about Austrian economics. So yeah, sure. That's why people were tagging me and saying, hey, you should look at this video. But he also relates it to his own personal experience in trying to launch things on the blockchain world. And so that's why I needed somebody else. And Steve was a good sport and willing to do this. But so let me just say, I think Steve will agree, it's kind of hard to condense what Curtis is doing here into a few clips. Yeah. Like the thing that even in the, when they give timestamps in the video and where it starts talking about economics, the host says, let's get to economics now. And it's you got to listen to 40 minutes before you even the story's just winding. And it's like a James Michener novel. So anyway, here we go. We're going to go through these things. Do you want to... Well, let me stop. Before we dive into some of the clips, what's your overall take on this, if you have any?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was mixed. I I don't mind the winding style. I think that's very natural especially for in-person communication. That's often, I mean, granted, that's what I do is also when I'm having personal communication is one-on-one as I kind of go on rambling things that do interconnect eventually. So I don't fault him for that. I think, in my opinion, I think it was a little sloppy. I think he touched on many different concepts, and I wasn't overly impressed by how they were woven together at the end. But I don't want to rag on him too much. I think he's an interesting mind, and I think he's bringing an independent perspective to things, and has been for a long time. And so that fact alone, I kind of value him for.
Yes. Okay. Fair enough. And yeah, with my thing, let me say this. This is the most this is the most impressed I have been by a club. Like, there have been several times where there's big Curtis Yarvin fans and they tell me, Bob, this guy is this fresh voice. You got to check him out. And I have never, like, a few times I was driven to like do a methodical point by point critique. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so with this one, it's not like if I watched this, I was like falling out of my chair, getting upset at the guy or something. So we will go through, because like I said, there's a lot of material here, but I will say that, yeah, as far as clips I've seen from him here, I was like, okay, yeah, he has read a lot. I mean, I always knew he read a lot of stuff. It was just, I thought on the areas where I knew what the material was, I thought, no, you're not getting that right. And you'll see a bit of that here where I'll be a gatekeeper or whatever you want to call it. But okay, so here is the first clip. This one's going to be like 2 minutes and change.
Then when I took a couple of college courses in the summer at Cornell when I was 14, and one of them was macroeconomics. And I'm just like, what even is this, right? And, what it is to be, first of all, to like define what macroeconomics is as we understand it today.
Government economics.
It is 20th century economics.
Yeah.
Okay. And that limit temporally, no one before like 1920 had heard of GDP.
Yeah.
Okay. That right there should make you ask some questions, because, first, basically, when we look at what Thomas Carlyle called the condition of England question, do we really look at America and see that it's like economic activity has like the quality of technology and goods has certainly increased since 1925. But like, anyone in 1925 who could just see like drone video of America's city streets would be like, this nation has become a ruin, but with cool cars, right? And like, absolutely. In so many different ways, they would be viscerally appalled by the result. And to tell them we have some intellectual BS that like should convince them that no, actually we were doing better than ever and we have the best government in history, and like, would like really not work on them.
But it's not economics, it's propaganda.
So the thing is that essentially what that tells you is not that you should spend a bunch of time questioning this economics, but that in the same fashion that I sort of designed Urbit, I'm just like, basically like, Urbit is not an evolution of Unix. Let's forget about Unix for a moment. Unix is great. It was great in its day, but let's start from scratch. And like, let's say, sort of what is economics from scratch? And it was there that I found, the great scholar who really, a lot of people associate the Austrian school with Hayek.
Yeah.
The fact is, Hayek was a student of Mises. Yeah. And like, Hayek is second rate and all over the map, whereas Mises is like a laser. You've read Human Action.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, it's an amazing, amazing work.
You got to love that.
Right. So anyway, you can see now, folks, why people sent me say, hey, Bob, you got to check out this thing from Curtis. Okay. So I have a few things to say regarding it. Do you want to go first, or?
Yeah, I think that was maybe my favorite part of the interview. I also agree that GDP is a suspicious concept, and not just in terms of an analytical understanding of economics, but also in terms of politics. It is wielded like a bludgeon. Like, it is the case that what he's saying is correct, that people overlook things like the health of a culture and just point at GDP and say, oh, look, this is a developed society and a good place to live because the GDP number went up. And not only is the GDP number misleading because you're trying to track economic activity and not necessarily productive activity, like are people creating things that are genuinely valuable, that are increasing standards of living. There are also intangibles like culture that absolutely matter. So, I discovered this personally when I went to Japan. I was in Japan for 3 weeks several years ago. Completely fell in love with the place instantly. I was not a Japanophile. I was not somebody that watched a bunch of anime. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Before I even get off the train in Japan, I'm like, okay, there's some cultural pattern in the atmosphere that's tangible, that is, according to my values, really, really, really high quality. Like, even if I don't care what the GDP is, even if it's 50% less, however these guys are living, I want to be a part of this. Like, I want to participate. I want to be around this. GDP be damned. So I definitely appreciate his sentiment there.
Do you know what Urbit is, or can you tell because he made an allusion to that, and that's part of the context of why he keeps going off on these tangents. He's telling the story of this thing he's developing. Do you know enough so people get what he was?
I don't know enough to do it justice. It just sounds like he's trying to take an independent take on computer programming. So he tells a story. I don't think it was in that clip. He tells a story of where essentially software and hardware are developing together. And so over time, if you have breakthroughs in hardware, but you're still developing software that was sort of based on the old hardware, maybe you're doing something inefficiently. And so that's what he tries to allude at there. Like, if we were just trying to, do economics from scratch, what it would look like. And from my understanding, what he's trying to do with Urbit is like, okay, we're just going to do programming from scratch. And with, new hardware, not baked in the old assumptions, what would it look like?
Okay.
So that was my impression.
Okay, but you don't know enough to say whether, like, oh yeah, he really was a genius, because part of what we couldn't include in the clips here, folks, is he would occasionally stop and be asking Peter's person to go find stuff in like old like gurus and things that everyone would recognize. I forget who it was now. Is like a leader in computer science who was acknowledging that, oh yes, this early paper from Curtis Yarvin, he had a lot in there. So Curtis kept proving to the audience, like, no, I really am a big deal in computer science, and I got blackballed later when my political views came out.
Yeah, I don't know enough to be confident.
Okay.
I do have some knowledge.
Do you want to smear him just by taking a guess?
I might as well.
Yeah.
So where I do have a little bit of knowledge is in crypto and blockchain stuff. And he was talking, from what I could gather, part of what he was doing sounds like a project that Satoshi Nakamoto himself was working on back in 2011. It was originally called BitDNS, but then it turned into Namecoin, which is essentially, from what I gather from the interview, that if you think about how the DNS system works, like when you put in a website, a top-level domain, such.com, there's a very complex network that handles DNS requests. And the idea was, instantly, a lot of people after Bitcoin was created were thinking to themselves, okay, well, what if we build a new domain name system on Bitcoin? So instead of something.com, it'll be something.bit. That was actually the extension that they used. And it was essentially like the internet on the blockchain, if you want to think of it that way. So that's, from what I gathered, there's some spirit of that in Urbit. And he was presenting it as if, this is just, I think at one point he said, this has the juice to take it from something that has no value to an asset with infinite value or something. And if my take is correct, then I don't think that was particularly original or novel or like that valuable per se, because that Namecoin was around for a while and then it kind of petered out. So it doesn't seem, it's a cool idea, don't get me wrong. Like, we do need something like that. We could build a lot of fun features of the internet on cryptocurrency. I hesitate to say Bitcoin anymore. But yeah, I wasn't bowled over by what I understood, but maybe that's because I didn't understand most of what he was saying. Okay. That could be.
Okay, fair enough. And I appreciate, you not just taking a swipe when you're not sure. Whereas those mathematicians, those guys.
Oh yeah, I'll punch down all day. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, my reaction to that short clip was, of course, I understand the generic, like, even when I was in, undergrad professor, and, you teach, I guess it'd be in macro, whatever, 101 or something, 201, whatever. When you teach GDP, the textbooks all have, this does not include blah, 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 but you know what I mean? Like environmental degradation. I mean, a lot of it's coming from a progressive lefty thing, and like, oh, geez, if there's, I mean, and one thing that's true is why they call it gross, by the way, as opposed to net, is that like if you're using up your coal resources or you're burning the forest down or whatever, that's not included. It's just literally looking at the measurable flow of gross output.
Yeah.
Okay. So even like, I guess that's not like some thing, but I grant you, Steve, that when you're looking at different countries or whatever, like GDP per capita, that's like for economists, it's like, what more do I need to tell you? GDP per capita. Right. Boom. So I get that. Also, on what you were saying about Japan, I totally want to go there. I am a Japanophile. Is that what I want to say?
Yeah, that's the term.
That they're germaphobes. That's me. They love sushi. That's me. They're really like polite in terms of interpersonal, just kind of very, etiquette. That's me. And I heard this thing that just cinched the deal is that apparently they work so hard that in the office, if you see during the day someone like dozed off, they're like, wow, he must have stayed late last night. Look, he's fallen asleep during the day. And I'm just like, that's my people, because I used to take little cat naps. Again, not because I'm lazy, but because I would be in the office. So anyway, I was just like, I got to.
It's the land of introverts, Bob. I went there and I was like, okay, these are my people. I don't speak the same language, but like, I don't know where the cultural programming comes from, but I've got whatever they have. And I think a lot of people do.
I have another one is that my dad's buddy was telling me that like he went like in the 80s, he was a purchasing agent for Kodak or something. So he was going over there a lot. And at that time he said the vending machines there, like you could just stick your hand up and take thing out. Like he didn't realize, in the US they designed them with the flap or whatever, so you couldn't do that. Whereas there, because like who would steal from a vending machine?
Yeah, it's all over the countryside. There are vending machines in the middle of nowhere, and they can make sense economically because people aren't going to smash them open and take the goods from them.
Yes, and he also saw like with the bike racks or whatever, like no one used locks, and so he asked the guy, "Well, why don't you?" And he said, "Well, what if somebody took somebody's bike?" And the guy was just like, a crowd would chase him down and beat him. He was just looking at him like no one would steal someone's bike. What are you, out of your mind? Right. So anyway, okay. So let's move on now to the second clip.
But let's zero in a way on the Misesian theory of money and banking, because one of the things that is really essential to the Misesian model of economics is that he's very against expanding the money supply. Yes. He's just like any supply of money is adequate. You have all of these justifications for inflation and all of, it's like, for example, the hedonic adjustments you see in GDP. First of all, they kind of assume that the purpose of life is hedonism, which is kind of the point that Carlyle would make. But they're also just like, what you're really saying is because technology got 3% better, I can skim off 3% on inflation and you won't notice. Yeah. That's what they're saying. Yes. Like, that's like, it's like, you're just like, it's a scam. It's a scam. Read John Stuart Mill's The Currency Juggle. He understands this perfectly. You're just like, the ordinary person looks at this economics, looks at 20th century banking economics and says it's a scam. And what Mises understands is Mises is trying to figure out the basis of this scam, and he identifies this in essentially maturity mismatched banking. And so he's basically like, this idea that banking creates money is really based on the idea that having liabilities and assets which don't match each other is economically stable. And it's just bad accounting. Like if you're a bank, you should balance your incoming payments with your outgoing payments. And if you want a 30-year, to offer 30-year mortgages, you need people who are willing to buy 30-year CDs. Yeah. That's called the flow of funds model. And it's sort of before magic, it's just normal accounting. Banks should be subject to cash flow accounting rather than solvency accounting.
Okay. So that was actually the clip where I was really the most impressed. And I said, okay, this guy has, read a lot, because it's a subtle point. Like that's something I didn't fully appreciate until, by the time I wrote Choice, I guess I definitely got it down. But in terms of understanding what is Mises' theory of what causes the business cycle, because I used to think it was, the Fed comes in and just creates a bunch of money, and that's not what it is. Like that doesn't help, but it's more like it's the banking system per se, and what we nowadays call fractional reserve banking. Mises called the issuance of fiduciary media is really like the essence of it. And there, Curtis was getting into it in terms of that maturity mismatch and things. And so anyway, that was good. By the way, folks, I'm not going to go through the business cycle theory because the last clip I have where it's Steve, the one where he's talking about Sven, the fisherman with the axes, and there's like he does like a little boom bust cycle. That's where I'll postpone to say where I think actually Curtis. I think if all you knew about Mises and his theory of what the boom bust cycle was from this interview, you would not understand it. I'll put it that way. So I'll defer for that. But here was the part where I was happy about it. Let me say I forgot to mention just the hedonic adjustment. I get there is a lot of hocus pocus going on, and mainstream economists will, if egg prices are going through the roof, and they say, yeah, but look at all the features you got in your iPhone now. So if you think about it, really prices have fallen when you adjust for quality. I get that that's a bogus move, and they're doing it for political reasons. But in the earlier clip, I meant to say, and we just started talking about Japan, and I got excited, forgot, was it to me, it seems like a kind of a ludicrous throwaway line to just say, oh, the people in 1920, if they could see us today, would you say we have cool cars?
Yeah.
I looked up Model Ts, which were still being produced till 27. They had a top speed of 42 miles an hour. So yes, they wouldn't just say, oh, your cars are cool. We'd say they have power windows, power steering, backup cameras. They talk to you. Some of them drive themselves, air conditioning. They can go whatever, over 100 miles an hour easily. So anyway, and they play movies for the kids in the back seat. You press a button and the trunk closes. So again, and to say, so these economists are just talking about like, let's measure the stuff the economy produces. Geez, what a bunch of morons. Like, I don't think that's a ridiculous thing. I guess last thing I'll say is, to me, it would be kind of goofy to say, I mean, physics is a fake science because they measure, like they come up with these elaborate things about temperature and how it's really the motion of molecule. But if I'm going to move somewhere, I need to know a lot more than what's the temperature. So physics.
Yeah.
I could say that, right? So I agree. There is a whole heck of a lot that's screwy with 20th century economics, but to just focus on GDP, last thing, and then I promise I'll stop, Steve, is also he wrapped it up and say, the idea that, people in 1920 would look at us and think that we have like the best government, we figured it out, like, where is that coming from? Like, right, but the claim was not the GDP is a proxy for how good your government is.
So let me try to defend the position here.
Yes,
because
do it.
I do think he spoke hyperbolically, but I think the missing piece of the puzzle is that he's talking about the connection between a culture of materialism and a high trust culture. Okay. So I think he's trying to say, look, we traded intangibles for tangibles. And one of the ways that manifests is that the politicians and the economists are obsessed with GDP and having power windows on your car, but they're missing rampant social decay that's everywhere and living in a low trust society. Mm-hmm. And what are the consequences of that in terms of your overall well-being living in this country? Is somebody's psychological state in 1923, the average person's average psychological state, is it higher or lower than it is in 2025? And in these circles, you hear very commonly people will say, "Oh, but look how great we have it materially. Look how great our material standard of living is." And I don't think that's compelling. I think humans adjust to the material surroundings fairly easily, even if they're by our standards poor. But the thing that really matters is the culture and the intangibles. I think that's what he's getting at there.
Yeah, and that's fine. It's funny with a lot of, certainly too, it happened a little bit when I dipped my toe in the water and criticizing Nick Fuentes, where the followers will, and usually they'll say some stuff that I point out that doesn't follow what you're talking about, and then the followers say, no, what he's saying is, So I get it.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, maybe we'll draw it back into economics more. I don't know if this is his position. I'm putting words in his mouth, but I wouldn't be surprised if he were to say something like, we got those gains in GDP by opening up our immigration and by having, by globalizing, by allowing ourselves to globalize in pursuit of the power windows on the car. That's what resulted in this terrible degradation. So that's the type of thing I would sort of, that's the type of argument I feel like is consistent with what he's trying to say.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that would be compelling for sure. If that were like a necessary trade-off, like, if you can have the power windows if you want and the conditioned air. Because right, I agree. People in 1925 were not like saying, that Model T is cool, but if I could get some conditioned air blowing in my face, otherwise, what's the point? Like, that's not what they were thinking. They were like, what the heck? It's like a horse, but it doesn't eat barley. All right. Let's take a break from the action, folks, for me to remind you, if you like what you're hearing on the Bob Murphy Show, and come on, is there really another podcast like this out there? I don't think so. If you like what you hear, I encourage you to support it. Go to bobmurphyshow.com/contribute. Every little bit helps. I really appreciate it. bobmurphyshow.com/contribute. All right, let's get back to the show.
Before we go on to the next clip, though, I want to try to clarify a bit more what you were saying, because I really would love to hear your take here on the analysis of banking. So I'm going to try to reinterpret what he's saying in different language, and tell me if this is what you're getting at. So from my own investigation into Austrian economics, it seemed like the language that the Austrians use commonly to talk about malinvestment is fractional reserve banking. So like in the Rothbardian school, the Misesian school, we talk about the downstream malinvestment that comes from creating the money supply, from increasing the money supply through the banking system, not through an outside interjection of liquidity into the banking system. That's sort of the language I'm familiar with those concepts. It sounds like what you're saying here is he's putting that in different language by talking about it being like mismatched maturities. So, like, in other words, the banks, let's say the time horizon of the banks is being mismatched with reality. And that's the thing that is causing, and that's the fraud. That's the underlying lie. Is that a fair way of? Is that what you're getting at here?
So here, let me elaborate. So, that maturity I'm glad you had us pump the brakes on this, because this is a subtle thing. And again, that's why I was like pleasantly surprised, because that's a subtle point that he's. Again, I don't think he quite nailed it. Like, I wouldn't have him come in and give a guest lecture to a money and banking undergrad class, because they'd be too fuzzy. But he was groping around something that is important, and certainly, is like the next layer down besides just, they expand the money supply, that makes the interest rate artificially low and screws things up. So, and Mises in the theory of money and credit refers to the golden rule of banking. I think that's what he called it. It was certainly, he called it the golden rule. I think it was big, where he said the maturity of your assets and liabilities should match. Okay, and so one way to, it's still, the issue is still fractional reserve banking, but a deeper way of understanding it is to say there's a maturity mismatch. And so specifically, what happens is when someone goes in to a bank and they have $10 $100 bills, and they just say, I want to put that in my checking account. And they put that in the vault, and now that person's walking around thinking I have $1,000 with Bank of America. So that's part of the money supply still. They still think, and M1 includes checking account balances. And so if you insisted on maturity matching, well, from Bank of America's point of view now, that $1,000 in Steve's checking account is a liability from Bank of America's point of view. Right. That's a maturity of 0. It's instantly callable, right? Yeah. You can show up at any point.
I see. Oh, sorry.
And so the only kind of asset they could possibly have backing that up is also cash on hand, right? So they need to have cash in the vault or in the ATM machine, whatever. ATMs. I almost said ATM machine. Oh, I need to get electric shocked. No, it's not. It's an ATM because it's redundant, folks. Right? It's not a hot water heater either. All right. So, but what they don't do, but now if instead of that, they go and they take the money in the vaults and lend it out to other people for 30-year mortgages, now that's a maturity mismatch. But notice that's also what we mean when we talk about fractional reserve banking, because so what he was saying there is, if they're going to give out 30-year mortgages to certain clients, then what they need from the households who are saving and providing that saving, and the bank's just acting as a credit intermediary or a middleman, is the households have to buy 30-year CDs from the bank. Yeah. So they can still do that where, they pay the households 3% interest and they charge 5% on the 30-year mortgage, and so the bank still makes the spread because they know some people are going to default on the mortgages, and they're going to still, and the reason the households do it that way instead of trying to directly find people and lend to them at 5 is because it's too risky to, lend to some couple, and if they lose their job, they can't pay you, right? So that would still work, but there'd be maturity matching, and there would be no fractional reserve banking because a CD issued by Bank of America is not money.
Okay.
Whereas, so that's
okay. I have two things on this.
Yep.
I'm so glad we stopped here because I actually asked Walter Block a question about this 15 years ago at Mises University. He gave me an unsatisfying answer, but I want to put it in Lou language and then ask you the question.
Did he blame the Palestinians?
No, we're not.
I'm getting spicy on this episode. Okay.
So another way of putting it, I have true story. This is a $2 bill I have on my stand here. The reason being is I was out at there was a local holiday in West Michigan, and my family, we all went to a tulip festival because we're in there's a lot of Dutch influence here, and so there's like a tulip farm. And anyway, we go into the place, and the guy was giving change in $2 bills, and because these hadn't circulated, they were stuck together. So I got $4 back instead of $2. So this is now my lucky $2 bill. But another way of putting what you've just described is to say that there's essentially multiple claimants on the deposit.
Yes.
So the depositor says, well, I've obviously got a claim there, and it's a deposit I can get back instantly. And then somebody else who's received that deposit then is also thinking that the bank is treating it as if it's good. So there's multiple claimants on the same piece of money, which smells like fraud. Okay, but then young Steve went up to Walter Block after the end of his lecture, and I said, okay, but what if we just change this to like a fractional reserve lottery, and so it's not banking where you're guaranteed to get your deposit back. You're just saying there's a high likelihood that when I put the money at the bank, that the money is going to be there. So it's not a CD. I'm not prevented from withdrawing it for the term, but I don't get the money. I'm not guaranteed to get the money back. It's like, hey, look, you have an 80% chance if we're responsible of getting it or not getting it. Would that solve the problem?
Okay, let me say some stuff, and then I'll circle back and try to directly answer you. But I want to say so within even Rothbardian circles, there is a dispute or controversy that Walter Block and William Barnett have written extensively on the idea that the fundamental problem is maturity mismatch. That's what causes the business cycle. That's the problem, of which what we call fractional reserve banking is just one example. Okay. But in their mind, they thought if Bank of America issues 1-year CDs and uses that to fund 5-year investments, just hoping they can keep rolling those CDs over 5 times in a row to fund it, that they also think there's something screwy with that. I don't know if they call it fraudulent, but they say screwy for sure. Okay. Or problematic or dubious. Right. And that also that it's economically destabilizing, right? Because they're saying there's some kind of weird thing where the interest rate, the term structure of interest rates isn't correct, where you're borrowing short and lending long. That's not right. That you should be borrowing long to lend long, and then let interest rates. You say, oh, but there's not enough. The savers aren't willing to commit to 30-year projects, and they want to know and so they'd say, okay, well then interest rates should adjust for that, and then you shouldn't be giving 30-year mortgages then if there's no one really. In other words, the bank's not fixing that problem by just saying, oh, it's cool, don't worry about it. Yeah, we'll get your money back on demand if you want, and we'll fund a 30. They're saying that's what the problem is and cause the business. Okay, but then there are other Austrians. I think it's Philip Bagus and somebody, it might be Dave Howden, but I might be getting mixed up. But there's a younger crop who challenged Walter and William on that, and they say, no, that's just entrepreneurship. Just like in general, you might try something and make some promises to your customers, and it blows up in your face, and it's not fraudulent. Corporations default on bonds all the time. That's not fraud. It's not necessarily fraud. It could just be entrepreneurial mistakes, and they screwed up, and there you go, right? So. Whereas they all agree in this debate, which is interesting, is they think that fractional reserve banking, in the classical is wrong. Yeah. Okay. And cause the business. So, so there is that element. So I don't know if I'm answering but I'm saying there's no it's not that all Rothbardians would give you the same
Right.
answer, I think, on that.
Right.
And so, and
Right.
yes, the one last thing I'll say to try to help answer is, so as you're aware, there's the free banking school, even among some self-described Austrians like Larry White, where they say, what are you talking about, guys? It's not, how can it be fraud? We can write the contract. If you earn interest in your checking account, you know they don't just have your cash sitting in the vault. What are you talking about? Everyone knows what's going on. It's not fraud. And we can put in clauses if you want and say the bank reserves the right to deny you payback if there's, a run the bank or something. So it's all above board. You don't have to, violate their contract. We can do all that. And so I think, number one, Joe Salerno, I know in particular, he doesn't argue the fraud stuff. I don't know if it's just because he thinks it gets murky or even if he doesn't think it's correct, but I just know he thinks, I'm not going to argue that he just sticks to like the economics, just that this causes the business cycle. And I know Mises says it doesn't matter whether, like legally speaking, if the bank notes, like, because in his day, he refers to bank notes. That's what he means. Like the bank, people put gold coins on deposit and the bank gives them a piece of paper saying, turn this in at any bank and you get the gold coins. And so if they issue more notes than there are coins in the vault, that's fiduciary media. And Mises says somewhere that it doesn't matter whether contractually or legally these things really are instant and redeemable. He says economically, the important point is just if the merchant community treats them as interchangeable with the coin, the base money, then that's going to lead to the problem. Okay. So,
okay. But, and then just to follow up on that. So in a scenario in which that's what happens, where the public is treating the fiduciary media as money, let's say that the banks are actually responsible and there aren't runs on banks. Wouldn't one naturally think, okay, well then the price level is going to stabilize and it's not actually a problem, even if there is this maturity mismatch. There's like a little bit of funny business happening, but then prices stabilize and it's not a problem.
So great question. And again, this is like the heart of like what George Selge and I were debating, and I'm still doing, I published some stuff and I'm thinking of coming back and hitting them again. I got to get marshal my forces. So again, I'm not trying to be wishy-washy or like do a classic economist thing and give you on the other hand, but the two schools of thought, I think this is a very cutting edge issue. Okay. Right. So one school of thought says, as long as nothing blows up, what's the problem? This is just like, this is awesome, and it just facilitates commerce. And that is correct, right? Like the banks by issuing, let me just make sure people aren't getting lost. So the reason Mises said that the important thing is not whether legally or contractually those notes really are instantly redeemable upon demand, and that's why they circulate at par because of that. But even if the banks technically could say we can suspend up to 3 months, but if the public still treats a piece of paper saying you can turn this into the Amsterdam bank and get one gold coin that's an ounce of gold or whatever, and the public treats it as such, so that when merchants are selling things, whether you pay in gold coins or notes from the bank, they charge you the same number of, quote, gold coins, right? Then that causes the problem, he says, because now the banks can inflate, right? That they can just print more notes than there are coins in the vault. And since they trade at par, that like expands the money supply. And then the problem is the way that new money enters the system, they don't just go around and drop it from a helicopter. They lend it into the community. That's the way, that's how the bankers make money. They make a loan, so they earn the interest income. And then when the loan gets paid off, that like they're kind of exposed when they've issued more notes and they could back up. But once the loans get paid off, they could burn the notes. So they're back to square one, but they've also earned that interest income, which is theirs free and clear, right? So that's why the bankers do that, because they can earn this interest income as long as, as long as too many people don't default and there's not a run in the meantime. But again, so the claim is that by them doing that, they lower the interest rate below what it really should be. That there's a sense in which the interest rate is no longer reflecting the genuine like intertemporal preferences and production possibilities of the community. And like households really haven't saved more, but all of a sudden there's a bunch of new money being lent out as if they did. And so the interest rate is giving the wrong signal, right? So that's kind of the deal. So now in that world, So yeah, the bank run, the issue is not there could be a bank run and that's a problem. That is a manifestation that kind of gives you a sense of something screwy. But even if there are no bank runs, there's still a problem. Rothbardians would still say that causes the boom bust cycle, this practice fractional reserve banking. Like FDIC didn't solve that. And now your question, so in a free market, Selgin and White would say the ability of banks to issue more paper notes is a good thing. That if there's a sudden demand to hold more money, you don't want there to be this painful deflation. They should just be able to print it. And then the subtle thing is here, and I'm almost done, Steve. The subtle thing is, I thought I had them, and I was going to say, oh, wait a minute, those are two separate things. You're saying if there's a sudden demand to hold money, that means with a constant money stock, prices would have to fall to clear the market. And so instead of having to go dig up more gold and hammer it in more coins to satisfy the increased demand to hold gold coins, the banks just print money. Oh, and that's just such a more elegant solution. I wouldn't have to waste resources paying guys to dig up gold. That's great. And I said, but wait a minute, it's still going to be, if they lend those coins into existence, that's still going to lower the interest rate. So that can't be right. The demand to hold more money doesn't mean more saving. And Selgin says, yes, it does. Like he agrees those are two conceptually distinct things. And we said, but in practice, it all works out and all the market's clear because he says the very act of holding a bank note is like the holder is lending to the bank that issued it. And so if you agree with that, then it makes sense that by the act of the banks can only get away with issuing more notes that are not immediately refluxing and getting presented for redemption if the public's willing to hold more notes, which is a separate issue from holding more money, right? And so he's saying, see? So yes, the interest rate drops, but that's exactly what should happen because the public is saving more. So in my published, peer-reviewed articles, like where I get really technical, I always come up with weird thought experiments where it's like every household wants to hold more money. The banks passively print it up and let them hold it in a Selgin White framework. And then when you say, well, who provided the savings with which the households all saved more, are holding more money now? And they would have to say, oh, they lent it to themselves. Like each household lent itself to, you know what I mean? And I was like, what the hell is it? So anyway, so I don't think that works, but I'm just saying those are the different.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay.
That is very interesting, and that also explains why I didn't like Walter Block's response. I think his response was something like, "No, you can't do that," and I was like, "You can't have a fractional reserve lottery. That doesn't work." But I didn't realize. I remember reading some of the free banking literature and thinking it was very good. I remember being persuaded by White and Selgin many years ago, but I haven't picked that thread up in a long time. So that's it's interesting. That's still like a cutting edge.
Yeah, and so it's like I said, there's keep volleys back and forth, and then I've seen what Selgin's response. I even interviewed him on the Bob Murphy show and brought up my hypothetical that I just told you. Right now I forget what he said, but what he said was enough that I need to respond. You know what I mean? Like I can see why in his mind he can still sleep at night and not like, oh my gosh, my career just been destroyed. Like I get why he thinks that. And they also do stuff like with insurance or something, right? Like, okay, well, life insurance company, if everybody died next year, they would go bankrupt. They can't pay. So does that mean life insurance is inherently fraudulent, or that insurance companies need to charge enough so that if everyone died tomorrow at 8 a.m., they could pay everybody the face value of their death benefit? That's kind of crazy, right? So there's lots of things like that where people are coming at this, and most of the people defending the fractional reserve banking stuff are just stressing, as long as everybody knows what's going on, then there's no, But on the other hand, I could say people still say I put my money in the bank, or like, hey, I went to the bank and took my money out. They don't say, yes, I lent my money to the bank, which is reflected in my checking account balance. Right. And I went and said, I would like to redeem my loan to you. They said, no, give me my money back that you're holding for me. So, all right. Okay. Well, we better keep going through these things.
Yeah.
We got two more here. I'm extra glad I had you come on because this is good.
Working forward into this question of the origin of money, I came up with basically an unusual conclusion, and my conclusion was that the origin of money could actually be related to financial markets today. And the Mengerian theory of the origin of money, and even the Misesian theory of money, relies a lot on something Mises calls the double coincidence of
Wants,
wants,
yeah.
because basically the good becomes more desirable as a medium of exchange if both parties have it. And I'm like, all right, that's interesting, but actually the way that a medium of exchange creates demand for a good is sort of fundamentally frictional. If you imagine you're in a virtual world where anybody can trade anything to instantly, the double coincidence of wants vanished. But do you maybe still have a source of, monetization energy? Could the monetization process happen at all without the double coincidence of wants? Let's assume the double coincidence of wants goes away. All right, and let's think about the monetization process in this imaginary virtual world where you can trade everything for anything else. Then you get a different incentive that comes into play rather than the double coincidence of wants. You basically say, if I'm comparing asset A for asset B as a store of value, how do I expect the exchange rate between A and B to evolve over time?
Okay, let me take the first shot at that. Well, it's still fresh in my mind, and I, of course, want to hear your reaction too. All right, so one thing is, folks, I say Misesian, and that's how I hear people say it. So I don't want to lock in that I think that's the correct pronunciation, the way he's saying it, but that's obviously a matter of point. Where he's going with this, so it is largely correct, and it's setting up, this final clip that we're going to play, where he ultimately, I think he has his idea for what would a superior money would be. But he's saying there's a lot we clipped out here, but he's saying in the Mengerian story of the origin of money that, Mises adopted, the idea was different goods have different degrees of liquidity or saleability. And so if you're going into, I'm elaborate, adding stuff here, folks. I'm telling you what the Menger story is. You're going into town and you have this elaborate telescope that you built and you want to trade it for some eggs. Well, for that to work, if you're just doing barter, you're going to have to find a farmer who has a bunch of eggs who also happens to want a telescope that day. And so that's what the double coincidence of wants is, that you find somebody who wants what you have and that you have what he has, and you guys can find a zone of a price exchange ratio that's where you can both swap and walk away thinking you got the better end of the deal. And so the issue is, that only allows for bilateral transactions, but in the real world, there's more complicated things involving multiple parties that could make everybody better off if you could consummate that whole chain of transactions. And you can't do that if you're requiring that each swap makes both parties better off in the moment, right? And so how do you get around that is, there are no farmers with eggs that want your telescope, but there's some guy over there that has milk that wants your telescope, and you realize, there's lots of people with eggs who want milk, and so I can swap, or you can say shoes or something, right? Because the farmer probably has milk too, right? And so, the cobbler has shoes, he wants my telescope. I don't really need shoes, but you know what? Okay, and you swap and get a bunch of shoes, and then you go and find various farmers who need shoes, and you get all the eggs you need, right? And so the point is, the double coincidence of wants is always there, right? So he's kind of making it sound like it goes with, that's not the issue. Like the way you, quote, solve it with a medium of exchange or money is just that it expands the sort of thing you're willing to accept. And so it's still true that in any given trade, you're only taking what you value more than what you give up. That's why it's voluntary. But your knowledge of the possibility of holding something as a medium of exchange rather than just directly consuming it or using it in production means that now you value some things more than you otherwise would. Just like in a prison or a POW camp, even if you don't smoke, you might trade something for cigarettes because there's lots of people who I can get what I need with this. Okay, so it's still, there is the double coincidence of desires. It's okay. And so now where he's going to make the transition, he's saying, but notice that story to work and like to explain historically why some goods and then ultimately like gold and silver were great for this type of thing, because you can, carry them around. Like you wouldn't do it for cows. That would be, then you're walking around. It's like, now I got some cows that I can barter with. That wouldn't be very convenient because you got to take care of them and they could die and whatever, go to the bathroom. So gold and silver are great for that because they're very homogeneous in value. You can slice them and dice them. whereas like diamonds aren't either. Like diamonds are valuable and they're a secondary, medium of exchange, but that's gold and silver are way better for that function than diamonds are. And platinum could work, it's just too scarce. And copper could work, but it's not scarce enough. That's why gold and silver are in the sweet spot on all these different dimensions. Okay, so that's the story. And then he's saying, but in a more modern world where we have markets and it's easier to trade things, and that those sorts of considerations about finding someone who has what you want isn't really the issue. He's saying now what would be a great asset if you're saying, do I want to hold asset A or asset B? It's not so much, well, gee, asset A, there's a lot more people who want that, so maybe I want to have a preference. Like, no, that's stupid. If there's no frictions, you can just find anybody, whatever you want. So now the issue is just what's going to appreciate more over time. And he's saying, like, in terms of, okay, so that's what he's getting at in there. Okay, did you want to say anything, Steve?
No, that covers it. I think that was a very, very charitable way of making sense of that clip. I don't know if it was that clear in his head. I'm not sure that's actually what he meant. I'm sure that's what he meant. If you stopped him though and said, explain the double coincidence of wants, I don't know that I could have given him full credit in an undergrad class. But I think that's what I just said. I'm pretty sure is what he's trying to get across. That's fair. Yeah, I was being a little autistic then because I'm listening to the words and I'm like,
it's funny how we flipped in the beginning. I'm like, look at what he just said. No, that's wrong. And you're like, what he's getting at is. Right.
No, if you're correct, you're probably correct. I think that's a very charitable way of putting it, and that fits, and also fits what he says later. So yeah, I don't have any additional commentary. I think that was good.
Okay. Again, I'm a professional at taking people who are saying stuff that's using the right words, and I know they've read the book, but it's like, what is that? Do they really get this? I'm not sure. Anyway. All right, here we go. Last clip, folks.
Let me give you an example of this, and this is an example that I used in some very early blog posts, actually, but we'll get to that. Let's say you're in a society with no money, and so you sort of feel this pressure to invent money. You're a fisherman in Iceland. Your name is Sven. And your idea is you're going to go out in fishing season, which is September, and catch a bunch of fish, and you're basically just going to keep the fish. And what Sven finds, being kind of dumb, is that fish don't keep. They don't keep. And so therefore, your goal is not to eat the fish. Those fish are a store of value. You are going to exchange them for other goods later. They are a store of value. Do you remember a day so early in Bitcoin world where people kind of measured Bitcoin's success by transaction volume?
Yeah, of course.
And then they realized that was kind of wrong.
Yeah.
I have a story about that. So in any case, you have a store of value, and Sven has no choice but to choose a store of value because he consumes many things other than salmon. He has a need to store value from the present into the future. His question, therefore, at a very abstract Misesian economic level, is what should I use to store value? And
fish is no good.
Fish is no good. Okay, so his second idea is, all right, I'm going to store something that keeps. I'm going to store axes. Okay, and so at this point, we are looking at a question of what is called the Nash equilibrium, a concept which considerably postdates, Mises. And we are looking, and, all right, if Sven wants to store money in axes, store value in axes, that's good. That's fine. That's okay. And, axes hold their value. An axe is an axe. An axe, a 2025 axe and a 2028 axe, as long as it's not rusting or something, keep it under good conditions, really holds its value. Can you say the dollar? I don't know, right? And so Sven is like, let me store money in axes. And, unbeknownst to him, Eric and Heinz and Hans and all these other people, he's basically testing out a Nash equilibrium. Everyone else makes the same choice. They're going to store money in axes. Here's what happens. There's a certain amount of elasticity in the production of axes. And so because there's a certain amount of elasticity in the production of axes, they don't disappear from the stores. Oh no, we have an efficient supply and demand market. The axe price skyrockets.
Yeah.
Axes go to the moon. They moon, and basically Sven is like, holy cow, this was the best way to store value ever because I bought these axes for 17, marks, 17 fish. And now, I could sell my axes for 827 fish. I win, yay me, Sven, right? And so the axe price skyrockets. But sadly, the success is illusory. Because when the axe price skyrockets, the capital markets spring into action and they're like, we are hearing the Hayekian signal from the axe market. People love axes. People are using axes more than ever before. Sven needs 20 axes. I don't know why he needs 20 axes. Does he have 20 hands, 20 children? Has he, imported, 20 immigrants to do his work with axes? We don't know. All we know is everyone loves axes. Everyone needs axes. Everyone is talking about axes. Let's get into the axe market. Let's invest in axes. There's an axe bubble, which becomes an axe craze. There's an axe mania. There's axe throwing. You might remember the axe throwing craze, right? Everyone is super into axes. There's nothing more. What does Sven want to do? He wants to show off his axes. He doesn't want to just keep them there. He wants to take them to the axe throwing event. They're beautiful axes, right? And things keep going up and up and up until it's just like, wow, there's a lot of axes on the market and the axe dealers start to cut their price. And Sven, if he's a smart Sven, is like, now is the time to dump. And he dumps. And he gets out of the axe market and makes a profit. But what must go up must come down. And the result is that, Svenland is left with this enormous glut of axes. There are all these, it's what Mises calls malinvestment.
It's almost like you're saying that we need a version of axes that cannot be produced in response to the market.
You might be saying that. You might be saying, wow, any supply of money is adequate.
Okay. Do you want me to go or you want to go?
You go ahead.
Okay. Few things. So, again, it's tricky, folks. I know for the folks at home who are just seeing these clips, you're like, wow, I just need so much more context. Yeah, if you watch the whole thing, there would be more context, but most of it would be him taking side quests, telling anecdotes, and then coming back to the main story. It was hard to distill this down. And he alluded to how he wrote on his blog about this Sven the thing. So maybe if I went and read that whole essay, I would know what he's trying to say here. But if he's using that to illustrate the Mises boom bust cycle, I don't think that's correct. And so it looks like it looks like they were trying to mix two things together. Yeah. That he was there trying to explain like a malinvestment, an asset bubble, which is that's what the Mises story is. He's trying to explain why do these things happen? Why are there resources that get floated into something, some sector that they shouldn't be? But then it wasn't clear to me. I thought they were saying in that story, the axes were the money.
Yeah.
And that's kind of mixing two things up, right? So, and also what he had said earlier, we didn't play it here in the clips, folks, but he had said correctly that, Mises has this central insight that any quantity of money can satisfy the social functions of money. That by adding, if you double the money supply, that doesn't make society just prices double, right? Any amount of money is adequate for all, to do all that stuff. And then that's true. Then Mises does say that, but it doesn't follow from there that, and so the problem is because we could go dig up more gold, that's what's causing the boom. No, that's not at all the issue. The issue is banks are able to issue claims on gold that are not backed up by gold. So even if gold hit 21 million ounces and stopped, as long as banks could issue fractional, fiduciary media claims on gold in excess of the coins in the vault, you would still have the boom bust cycle. So there's that element. And then on the, if you think Bitcoin or some other thing is going to solve that problem, and I do see some Bitcoiners saying that, only if people don't use claims on Bitcoin that could be fractionally issued, right? So if that's what you mean too, that, we're just going to use it, and you could plausibly say that, right? Like it's easier to do online commerce with Bitcoin than it is with gold coins, and hence I get that. But I just want to make sure Bitcoiners who are fans of Austrian economics understand if you say Bitcoin fixes this, it would have to be because you think we're also not going to do fractional reserve, claims on it. Okay, I think I'm good.
Okay, I do have several things to say on this.
Mm-hmm.
This is the area that it just left a bad taste in my mouth for many reasons. Also because it intersects with Bitcoin, and this is something near and dear to my heart. So the first thing I want to say is a more general point. Okay, something that is a red flag is when people are appealing to mathematical sounding concepts that don't actually fundamentally check out, or that they're misapplied. This happens in Bitcoin all the time, and it has since its beginning. They'll throw around terms like Nash equilibrium or Schelling points. This was another big one. And that sounds impressive. And the purpose, generally speaking, is to give the impression that there's this very high mathematical theory. And what Bitcoin is solving these very high abstract mathematical concepts. And because this great resolution, this great solving of academic problems, therefore it's a breakthrough, and that's why ... you should go buy Bitcoin. But you're never going to have any chance of understanding the high theory. So just know that it's out there, and it's something Nash equilibrium. Okay. There's a rhetorical move that's done all the time. I don't know if this is what his intention is, but I've seen it in Bitcoin constantly. So the first thing I would say is what does he mean by Nash equilibrium here? So for people that don't know, I'll try to give the big picture overview. The idea of a Nash equilibrium is some sort of stable state whereby the individuals in a game, what a game is open for debate, are all pursuing their optimal strategy for profiting. And because they're all doing like the theoretically best strategy, an equilibrium is locked in. So nobody gains anything by changing their strategy. Okay. One of the many problems with this concept is that it doesn't apply to the real world because there are many axiomatic assumptions that don't hold. This is true for virtually all game theoretic concepts. So, for example, if you're talking Nash equilibrium, there's an assumption that everybody knows what all the strategies are. They all understand the rules of the system. They're all playing by the rules of the system and not trying to corrupt the game that is being played. There's a list of assumptions that are baked into mathematical models that are trying to talk about Nash equilibrium. Okay, none of that applies, for as far as I can tell, to the discussion of money here, and it certainly doesn't apply to Bitcoin, because there's the world of Bitcoin, which is what they're really getting at, is wow, maybe Bitcoin is perfect money. Everything can be corruptible, and there are many differing strategies. So it does. So your little Nash equilibrium doesn't describe a corruptible system. Like, for example, if one were to try to target the developers, the Bitcoin developers, as a weak point of the network and corrupt them to, put an artificially low block size limit there and divert transaction fees onto an alternative network.
Like if they wanted to hijack Bitcoin, is what you're saying.
Theoretically, that suddenly breaks the Nash equilibrium model. No longer applies. So that's just a long-winded way to say, be careful when you start hearing these concepts. There's another diatribe I can give about Schelling points and how they don't actually apply to Bitcoin, but people think they apply to Bitcoin all the time.
Can I stop you real fast?
Yeah, certainly.
Like keep track. Like don't lose the points you're making. I'm not gonna. My quick take on. I think you're right. Maybe he does mean everything you're saying, and I 100% agree. Other people I've seen online use Nash equilibrium in the way you're talking about, and I think there though, because he was saying now Mises anticipate. I don't know if it was in that literal clip, but around this point, he was saying he was giving credit to Mises for talking about Nash equilibria before Nash, developed the concept. And I think all he meant there in the fishing axe example was because a critical part of Nash equilibrium is to say what you're doing is optimal or a best response given what everybody else is doing, even though the total outcome could be crazy, but no individual has an incentive to deviate. So I think he was trying to explain while these axes prices are going to the moon, everybody involved might know this is kind of nuts. Like this is way above the quote fundamental value, but hey, given that everybody else is going to push it up one fish higher tomorrow, I might as well buy in today. So I think that's the limited sense in which he was invoking it right there.
Okay, but it still doesn't apply.
I'm not defending it. I'm just saying that's what he was. And I think, he was just doing it there just to kind of bamboozle and say, do you guys understand how much I've read? So go ahead.
Okay. So that is a fair point. So I don't think the concept there even would apply of Nash equilibrium because, as I was saying, strategies change. People's information is not evenly dispersed. Their ideas are not, like the assumptions of the efficient market hypothesis, for example, don't hold at all in the real world because people's information state varies wildly.
Should we talk about infinitely repeated games in the subgame perfect Nash
no,
equilibria?
You're going to give me an aneurysm. Okay. So. You said now don't lose your train of thought, Steve. And then okay. Well, I have many other things I can say. We'll leave it at Nash equilibrium. One of the other things, because this is applying to Bitcoin, and he's talking to Peter McCormick, so they're talking about Bitcoin. Peter McCormick says, "Well, wouldn't it be great if we just had this theoretically ideal money, the supply of which couldn't be inflated under any circumstance?" And they're hinting, yes, and the secret is revealed, and that's Bitcoin, and that's why you should go buy more, most importantly. Okay, trouble is, that's all theory land. That's not reality. In Bitcoin world as it is right now, and will always be, you can create more Bitcoin. The only reason that Bitcoin is not created out of the ether is because of social agreements, okay? It is possible to change Bitcoin software. There's a whole bunch of powerful incentives that are trying to prevent people from changing or incentivizing people to change or not change. Yep, that's there. And you're relying on incentives that are corruptible. If a powerful vested interest like the U.S. government or any other, some secret Geneva plot, put all their resources into corrupting the software developers and pushing and capturing the Bitcoin Core GitHub, you can change any feature of Bitcoin. Now you could say, but my node will prevent that from happening. No, that's a technical misunderstanding of how Bitcoin operates. You can fork yourself off the network, but if the majority of the miners are using the software that is produced by Bitcoin Core and that group is corrupted, they can produce more Bitcoin. This is not just theoretical. This has already been floated multiple occasions by multiple people, including a Bitcoin Core developer named Peter Todd. And there are specific reasonable reasons why they would want to increase the supply of Bitcoin, because the direction that they took Bitcoin, they are going to run into security problems with, I won't go into details, but there is a proposal to remove the 21 million limit and allow for arbitrary inflation. Well, I shouldn't say arbitrary, predictable inflation forever. Mm-hmm. So instead of a hard limit of 21 million, it's every block, a Bitcoin is created or whatever the number ends up having to be. Ad infinitum, it's predictable, but it's not capped at 21 million. There are other proposals as well to deal with the security.
What if they first check in with you and Roger Ver? Is that okay?
Yeah, I could give
you guys give veto power.
Yeah. Well, yeah. One of the ideas, and also to solve the security problem, is to essentially tax everybody on the network a very small amount to pay. It's called, I think, demurrage. And so if everybody gets taxed the same very small rate and it goes to pay miners, maybe that solves the security problem. Mm-hmm. But I would only agree to that if I get to be the recipient of all of that small tax. So there would be a little asterisk there. Anyway, that's another long way to say they have. You listen, the poor people listening and not understanding Bitcoin are listening to two big brains, and they go, wow, this great theoretical problem is solved by the theoretically ideal money, something Nash equilibrium, and it's Bitcoin, and it can't be inflated. And that whole story is bunk and bogus. So I'm just very very sensitive and bothered by that, because it's representative of the type of discussion that has been happening in Bitcoin for a very long time. We'll make it a Bitcoin discussion, but yes, that's.
Well, that is relevant, because you're right. That is partly what they're doing, and that's Peter McCormick show. Just on that point, because I remember, when I first was getting into it, and there were two things. One was, this is anonymous. They can't track you and everything. And it's math. So they could have supercomputers doing it for 10,000 years. They can't They can't inflate, 21 million is harder than gold. And then as I was going and learning more, and then it was like, oh yeah, they're like the personality wars. And this guy's doing this. Like, well, wait a minute. I thought people couldn't, why are people involved? And then there's like, oh yeah, there was this thing here because there was a bug and they fixed that.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
How can they fix a bug? Well, what if we decide that the 21 million is a bug? Couldn't they fix that? And anyway, so realizing
the bug created 30 billion Bitcoin or something. I did want to say I want to ask you one question to elaborate, because you were mentioning, you were responding to the idea that Bitcoiners are saying we've solved this problem. And then you say, well, what if we do fractional reserve lending just on Bitcoin? Then you're going to run into the same problem. Okay. Another question is, what about the very likely scenario that the world we're moving towards, in which it's not even just fractional reserve banking on top of Bitcoin? It's actually you don't own the Bitcoin. A company owns the Bitcoin on your behalf because of how they structure the network. So it's custodial Bitcoin, and it's just fake IOUs. So it's not even they're not even participating in the fractional reserve system. It's just the Bitcoin that you have in your PayPal wallet isn't Bitcoin at all. It's just fraudulent because people are trading IOUs and not the actual thing.
Is that qualitatively different from me? Like, let's just say the $100 bills are the actual money.
Yeah.
I go give it to the bank and I'm walking around and I just have an electronic thing in my checking account. Like, the bank just owes me that money. Is what you're saying different from that?
Yeah, I think so. So one is the idea is, I guess closer to just straight up fraud. Instead of pretending instead of using the infrastructure of banking through creating a loan that is, at least on paper, supposed to be backed up by coins. What I'm saying is, if you don't actually have the individuals owning the coins at all, it just allows for rampant fraud because the actual asset itself is not trading. So like in Bitcoin, part of the appeal of Bitcoin was that when you're actually trading the units, there isn't room for that kind of fraud here. It's a peer-to-peer thing, so I can literally give you the coins and then you have it. Right. Totally not talking about fractional reserve lending at all. But if we're not existing in that world at all, and it's literally just IOUs, it seems like there's an inherent fraud problem there that I don't know how you would. There's nothing in Bitcoin that would prevent that from happening at all, because it's like a second layer on top of it.
If I'm understanding what you're saying, it's that, and you're saying no, that's not the same thing as like what banks do right now. And I'm saying I think you're not understanding how, quote, fraudulent what banks do right now is. In other words, you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing inherent in $100 bills that once you hand it over to somebody, like what that he's got it stored somewhere, he can do whatever the heck he wants.
Yeah, but you're still participating in some kind of a legal arrangement. I mean, it feels more official. Maybe it's just a very official feeling fraud that's going on then. So another But
I mean, like if there's some custodian out there that you you transferred them USDC and said, hey, I want you to buy a bunch of Bitcoin and then you're sitting there and you check your account and like, oh, I got 13 Bitcoin in there. I'm awesome. But they didn't actually behind the scenes buy any of it. Is that what you're saying? And they just think they owe it to you?
Concrete example. Okay. So in El Salvador, they had a state issued Bitcoin wallet for people. It's called the Chivo wallet. Mm-hmm. Ironically, they had like $20 of Bitcoin that was in there for people that signed up, something like that. And it was, KYC. And so a lot of people got their money out of Chivo, but they had a hack where a bunch of people's private information was leaked. Go figure. So you imagine this is the Bitcoiner folks are trying to integrate with nation states. So imagine they end up having the state wallet, the official state wallet of El Salvador. And they claim there are these currency units on there that they say are Bitcoins, and they're giving to people, but it's literally not backed by anything at all. It's not backed by actual Bitcoin whatsoever. It's literally just straight up fraudulent. It's not like they're creating a lending, like a lending arrangement. It's just literally fraudulent. And that's the type of thing. If one were not using custodial wallets, if one were actually trading the Bitcoin, if there was actually $20 of Bitcoin in the wallet that you could get out in a peer-to-peer way, that type of thing would be impossible. That was kind of kind of the whole point. Is it would
yeah.
We could do the peer-to-peer.
I think I get what you, yeah. So you're just saying, like, if there were, like Bernie Madoff or something, once you hand over something to somebody, and just because you think he owes it, if he's doing stuff behind the scenes, that's crazy, then you're kind of exposed.
Yes,
right.
At the national level, so that we could literally be talking about like the national wallet app. Yeah, that people.
It would be like if they were supposed to back up dollars with gold, and then they said in 1971, no, we're not doing that. It would be like that insane.
Yeah, but also like the dollars that they were issuing, like, weren't even the official ones. It would be like they're your own blue branded version of the dollars.
No, I get what you're saying. Yeah. Right. So you're saying it's one thing if you give some like you had the private keys and you transferred your Bitcoins into some entity, and they said, yep, you just deposited whatever 2 Bitcoins. You're good. We're good for it. You owe it. You can check in and check your thing. You log in with your password, your 2-factor authentication, because it's so safe, and you can see it. But then behind the scenes, they did something with it. And not even that they loaned it out to somebody, but because like the regulation is so lax, it's not even like, oh, well, at least we have capital requirement. No, they just, boom, it's gone.
Yeah, I just
sounded like you want one final word. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to on that note. What I wanted to say is when people are using a Bitcoin app on their phone, the system is so screwy right now by design that there might literally be zero connection at all with actual Bitcoin moving. It's literally just like promises that a company is making to you. So that's just kind of the concept I was trying to get across.
Okay, yeah. So I might have been giving too much credit to like knowing that like if there's a stable coin issuer and we know that they have a whole portfolio of assets, and you're not just saying but so it's not literally they got $100 bills in the vault. You're saying like they could have taken the money and they're like, they went on cruises to Tahiti. Like,
it's a company promise.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So yes. And I agree with you. Bitcoin people need to realize that if you're not holding the private keys, then, again, just like with gold coins, if you're not literally holding the gold in your possession, if you give it to somebody else, the fact that they can't print more gold. Well, if someone else is holding it, then, what you're relying on is a promise. So, yes. It may be a good promise. It may be a bad promise, and I'd rather have a promise of gold than a promise of $100 bills.
Yes.
But
yes.
Anyway, I'm just saying there is that disconnect. So yes, just because of the limit of 21 million, which has an asterisk, as Steve pointed out earlier, that by itself doesn't mean, even if we move to a world where all transactions were denominated in Bitcoin, that per se would not completely solve the problem if if people were still transacting and thinking of themselves as, oh yeah, I got 20 Bitcoin to my name, when really what you mean is people owe me 20 Bitcoins, even if they're big companies. Okay. Well, I got to wrap here. I got a hard stop. Thank you so much, Steve, for coming in. I definitely think your presence here made the conversation, it wouldn't have been a conversation at all if it had just been me, but you get what I'm trying to say. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Bob. This was really fun.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.